Welcome back to another video on Gearsaw Studios, and today I'm going to be showing you how to build yourself this little mushroom house. It's more so mushroom than house, but it's perfectly livable, with a few modifications such as a porch, and then you can build an interior at the top. You can have a perfectly functional mushroom house right here. So without further ado, let's investigate how we'd go about this. Starting off, find a nice flat area. You can see right here, there's a lot of flat areas on this mushroom island, so we could use that. You can also build this in a dark forest. Now, to start off, let's get ourselves this thing. It doesn't really look like a mushroom, but trust me, this is the best way to start. Ordinarily, I'd be using mushroom stems, but I want this to be possible on Bedrock Edition. So I will be making sure that I build it completely out of easily obtainable blocks for Bedrock Edition because, mushrooms are an odd case. Now, this is not actually what it's meant to look like finally. In reality, we're actually going to be making the cap pretty early on in the video. This is because we want to be able to smooth out this thing with a bunch of stairs and other blocks later on, but for now, we want to do the cap so that way we can actually blend it into it. So for now, go 2 blocks above your build. I did 5, 5, 5, so that way it gets thicker at the bottom, thicker at the top, thin in the middle. And then with those, we place down a little bit of a red circle. For now, I'm just going to make it some weird square. And then we'll want to go a few blocks out off of it. For our next step, after we have a very simplistic stem, then we'd want to start doing the cap. Right here is actually not what you're supposed to do. And let me explain. The idea behind this is I wanted to just, do a mushroom cap, and this would be pretty linear. Don't do that, actually. That's a mistake. Because here's the thing. If you do this kind of mushroom cap, it's going to look kinda boring. You see this? I mean, this might work for a brown mushroom, especially once we introduce some imperfections to it. But if you're doing a red mushroom like this tutorial is doing, then I wouldn't recommend it. So here, let's get rid of this part, or really just the entire cap in general, I guess. And here's the idea. Don't do this kind of thing. Right here, that's not a good cap. Instead, maybe do something more like this. Maybe an extra block at the top. Make it bulbous, kind of like the normal red mushrooms of this game. Here's a small model of it, and you can see how the red cap is kind of bulbous, and it has that imperfection. You can see how it's kind of wobbly, it's not symmetrical very much. We want that kind of effect. So don't do a nice clean slope. Instead, you either do it something kind of flat like that one and make it, abundantly clear. And if you're doing this, I'd make it so that way it would bulge out like this so you could see some of the pores on the bottom. Or you make it nice and round like a red mushroom. Don't do in between. Anyways, for the advisable size of this, assuming you have a 15 block stem like this, then maybe a 19 by 19 circle at the top, somewhere around this layer. And of course, the link tree in the description has some generators so that way you can do perfect circles. Right here, you can see I in fact have the cap, and it's really just a sphere. I've accidentally built a sphere rather than a bit more bulbous, but still, we can fix that. Now, what we want to do is, you can see on the bottom how I left it completely empty. Let's get rid of these little marker lines. And now, let's mess up the build. Yeah, let's ruin it. That's actually completely intentional. Because what we want to do is make it imperfect. We want it to be a bit more organic looking, because the last time I went outside, I didn't see any perfectly circular mushrooms. Let's do that. Make some parts lean out a bit more than they should, make some a little scrunched up, and then edit what you have here accordingly. It will not be symmetrical. That's kind of the point. And then, once we have it all sufficiently distorted, then we will add some extra details. Because of course, there's a reason why I'm not using mushroom blocks. There's better things. We saw on the palette screen, we're going to be using some whites on this. You don't have to do that if you're using brown. If you're using brown, then maybe just do some varying other shades. Make, I don't know, mud or something on it. Packed mud would probably work very well. This one side of the mushroom has been sufficiently distorted, and you can see versus the nice and clean other sides, I haven't done super high amounts of work on them. This one has little droopy bits, and well, it's a mess. precisely what we want. You can even see from the top, while the rest of it's still a circle, this one's more oblong. This is also what we want. We can make it jut out at various points. We want to make it seem organic and natural. I didn't build this grew here. Think of it like that. Of course, we are building it, but let's ignore. And then we just do this on the 4 sides. If you do have access to world edit tools and the like, do not just build one side and copy it onto the other 4. Because although that might save you a lot of time, ultimately it's going to become pretty obvious that you copied, and thus your build is going to appear a bit more built rather than organic. Right here, you can see the normally circular top has been a little bit more rounded, added some hanging bits, and you can see, well, it's effectively done. Of course, there are still some weird things I've done, odd decisions. Always review your work before recording, pro tip. But you can see right here how it's a pretty lumpy mess, which is exactly what we want. And you can see how on the top it's off-centered. We want that. If something's centered, that's, not very good. You can see this actually looks like a mushroom now, besides, the plastic-looking stem. So from here, what we want to do is, well, we want to thicken it up a little. And we just place down a few blocks here and there. We kind of wobble it a little, if you get what I mean, more messed up stuff. And then we'll have a layer of some sort of pour block. Of course, yeah, you could technically use actual pour blocks like right here, where you just place down the block and then remove the texture off of it and have something like that. But at the same time, that can be a little infuriating to do, so perhaps you want something a little bit easier. Of course, you don't have to do a pour texture, but it really helps your build. Potentially something like birch planks could help. Something in the birch color range. Technically you could use like pale planks if you were so inclined. Diorite's not a horrible choice. I mean, smooth sandstone might actually be one of your best choices, and it's pretty easy to get. Stuff like that. We want something light and not super textured. Like, we don't want to be using something with a lot of design, like glazed terracotta. Of course, none of them would fulfill that role, but you get the idea. Something that looks kind of organic. With the underside now complete, we are left with one last thing for the cap, and that's a spot. Of course, we have a spot right here, but, it's a little anticlimactic. We need several. So here's how you do it. You place down a splotch of snow, and not white terracotta. There's a reason for that, because white terracotta is surprisingly dark, all things considered. Here, let me show you the difference. You could, but I'd rather do snow. So here we have our blob, and then we surround it in red wool. And of course, if you're doing another kind of mushroom, then you just surround it with the wool version of whatever concrete you're doing. If you're doing completely out of wool, probably place a lightning rod somewhere. But, things like that. You just place down some blobs of snow, surround them in red wool, and then, finally, we can start working down here. You just want to thicken up this base, preliminary stuff, so that way it has almost a root system, even though I don't think mushrooms actually use their roots for anything but support. And then, of course, we can go inside, and you can see absolutely nothing, mainly because you guys probably can't see considering the brightness on my videos. But don't worry, I've been fixing that, but still, we have this stem, it's going to be worked on, and now we're going to add spots. With this good old mushroom cap complete, we can now look at it from above, and it looks very nice. We'll be incorporating things like little windows onto it when we actually do the house portion, which is in fact optional. But here's the thing. Yay, good cap, good underside, nothing else. So let's figure out how to do the stem. You can see I'm already doing a bit of it here. And don't forget, you can make it go into the ground, not just plastering it on top, but actually make it look like it grew into the ground. So you can see right here, I'm going to be using a lot of stairs and slabs. We're going to distort it in a similar fashion to this. And how I did that, I actually just broke it and then rebuilt it with bad dimensions in order to make it look organic. Yeah, it's kind of funny and time consuming. Yeah, that whole thing took like an hour and a half. But anyways, you can see right here, well, we just add some stairs and slabs, and then we mess it up, and then we can add little strips of pale oak logs, add buttons onto it to act as little spots and damages, and then finally, we'll have a nice looking mushroom stem. We can in fact incorporate little things like windows onto it as well, but we also need to make sure it is in fact, ladder worthy. because if you can't get up here, you're gonna have issues. So you can see right here, this is a pretty decently sized living area. We could definitely put windows onto it, drill a little piece right here, make it go in, and then we can add the window like maybe right there, stuff like that. And then we can maybe add a little bit of wood around it to make it look like a real house, because for now it doesn't look good. But there's the idea behind the house portion. We just thicken up the stem, add a ladder through it, and we live inside the cap. Now, with this stem all completed, this thing looks complete. Of course, we still have a few extra details and the interior, but let's discuss. We can see already, we have all the stairs, we have the pail, we have some buttons on it, little holes for windows on some points, and then right here we have those little shrooms that you can see on trees sometimes, pictured here. And right here, you can see trapdoor only window. Yeah, it's very expensive, but it looks cute and it's very small. A nice porch. You can see how I'm using trapdoors and stairs to make a rounded effect. And then if we go inside, it's just a little quaint place. You can also add little things like livability stuff. Right here, maybe a carpet. You could use mushroom pour right here, but I know Bedrock Edition has a serious problem with how mushrooms are used in building, so I'm going to avoid using them. And then right here, you can see I have little windows on the top. They link into here, we have glass panes on them, and you can see how they point out a little. And here's a closer look at them, pause it if you want to copy them. But anyways, all your mushrooms should be looking slightly different. We have the same general concept, but you guys might do it differently. And now it's time for the same thing with the interior. Whether you want to do proper walls or want to live in a nice red space is up to you. Personally, I'm probably going to do proper walls, but they're still mushroom themed. Maybe like red terracotta stripes or something. But anyways, make this a livable base and make it nice and cozy. Lots of lighting, have these poke in, maybe separate rooms. Right here, you can see we have the entrance unchanged really, and then we have a bit of the interior. Beds here, cartography table, and then some basic utilities. I also used a lot of paintings on the walls. Since I didn't feel like shaving out each individual unused block since everything's in the cap, I decided to just decorate it with excessive amounts of paintings and banners. Little trapdoor platforms here too, and this is where we have the loom and the suspiciously Gearsaw shaped logo. But anyways, we can see everything else up here, and it's pretty simple. The walls are alternating white and red concrete, terracotta. They're a bit unsaturated. We do have a bit of wasted space right here. I'd actually recommend lighting this up and not clipping through the floor. Just use some torches. Essentially, we don't want mobs spawning in the walls and making annoying noises, even if they pose no threat. So go in and make sure to light it up. Anyways, you can see little ladders here for the windows, these dormers. We can actually look out of them. Not very well, but you can certainly still do that. And from the outside, they look perfectly fine. Going back in, some moss in order to decorate it a bit more. And then we have anvils, storage, a bed, nothing terribly complicated. It's really the ceiling. And you can see above these walls, by the way, spruce here, well, we just have a bunch of stairs focusing in on one point. I did extra red concrete to flatten it out, so that way there's a unique ceiling. And then I added a singular lantern right here for added lighting. Not the most interesting interior, but it's livable and it kind of has a charm to it. It's just a thing. But now, we need to spice up the mushroom fully, and that's going to the bottom and incorporating some foliage into it. So let's get in some grass. And then we're going to surround it. And yes, I know the noises are a bit loud in the video most likely, but still, add a big patch of grass and make it kind of like spread out and like have little outcroppings like this. Those are what really add to the build. Then plant some mushrooms on them. Right here, you can see the mushroom has now been landscaped, including all the things you find in the wild, including, well, these little mushrooms. And then we have some grass surrounding it, maybe surround it in mycelium if you're not on a mushroom island. This little path, those grow naturally. Same thing with those lanterns and their little vines made of metal called chains. So yay, we have a nice mushroom. By the way, if you're wondering how to do the oak leaf effect, we just place down oak leaves in a squiggly pattern, add some spore blossoms at the top to make it look a bit more foresty, and what do you know? we have a cute mushroom build. And, well, if you really wanted to, it is perfectly livable. Of course, that part's optional, but I think this is a pretty good mushroom. Build several of these, probably takes several hours to do so. But hey, they're cute, and if you built several of them, you could make a very nice little mushroomy area. So, please like and subscribe, insert sad graphics here, and enjoy the rest of your day. Gearsaw out.